The stagecoach pulled into Julesburg, Colorado on a Tuesday afternoon in late August 1874, carrying nothing but dust, weary passengers, and one young woman whose entire future hung on a single piece of paper tucked inside her threadbare coat pocket. Willow Anderson stepped down onto the wooden platform with shaking legs, her dark brown hair falling loose from its pins after 3 days of relentless travel from St. Louis. She was 22 years old, alone in a town she had never seen, and her only connection to this place was a letter written by a man she had never met. The late summer sun beat down mercilessly as she stood there, clutching her small carpetbag and trying to ignore the stares from the locals gathered near the general store. "You need help, miss?" asked the stagecoach driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes. "I am looking for the XXX Ranch," Willow said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know where I might find it?" The driver pointed west toward the horizon where the land stretched out in endless waves of golden grass. "About 5 miles that way. You got business out there?" "I hope so," she said, more to herself than to him. She had no horse, no wagon, and precious little money left after paying for the stagecoach fare. The letter in her pocket felt heavier than it should, considering it was just paper and ink. Her uncle had given it to her on his deathbed 2 weeks ago, pressing it into her palm with trembling fingers. "Go to Colorado," he had whispered. "Find Thomas Xavier. Show him this letter. He will help you." Those were the last words Uncle Henry had spoken before the fever took him. Willow had no other family, no prospects, and the boarding house where she had been working was being sold. The letter was not just her only hope, it was her only option. She started walking west out of town, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The carpetbag grew heavier with each mile, and the sun seemed determined to burn through her bonnet. She had walked perhaps 2 miles when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. A rider approached, sitting tall on a magnificent chestnut mare. He slowed as he drew near, and Willow got her first look at him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of blue, almost startling against his tanned face. He wore dusty work clothes and a battered hat, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. "You heading to the XXX?" he asked, his voice deep and measured. "I am," Willow said, stopping to look up at him. "Are you familiar with it?" Something flickered across his face, amusement or maybe curiosity. "You could say that. I am Thomas Xavier. I own it." Willow's heart jumped into her throat. This was the man, the one her uncle had sent her to find. She reached into her pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the letter, now creased and worn from being handled so many times during her journey. "My uncle, Henry Anderson, told me to give you this," she said, holding it up to him. Thomas dismounted in one fluid motion and took the letter from her hand. His fingers were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. He unfolded the paper carefully, his blue eyes scanning the contents. Willow watched his expression change as he read, saw something soften in his features. When he looked up at her again, his gaze was different, warmer somehow. "Henry Anderson was your uncle," he was. "He passed 2 weeks ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Thomas said, and the sincerity in his voice made tears prick at Willow's eyes. "Henry saved my life once, years ago when I was just a kid trying to make it on my own. I told him if he ever needed anything, anything at all, he only had to ask." "He never mentioned you," Willow admitted. "Not until the very end." Thomas folded the letter and handed it back to her. "This says you need a place to stay and honest work, is that right?" "Yes, sir." "Well then," he said, and a small smile touched his lips. "That is all the proof I need. Come on, Let us get you to the ranch before you collapse from heat stroke." He helped her up onto his horse, and Willow found herself sitting in front of him, her carpetbag balanced on her lap. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she tried not to think about how close he was, how she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back. The XXX ranch appeared on the horizon after another 20 minutes of riding. It was larger than Willow had expected, with a main house built of solid timber, a big barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals where horses moved restlessly in the afternoon heat. It was clear that Thomas Xavier had built something substantial here. "It is not fancy," Thomas said as they approached, "but it is honest work and good land." "It is beautiful," Willow said, and she meant it. He helped her down from the horse, and an older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. She had steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Thomas, who is this?" the woman asked. "This is Willow Anderson, Martha. She is Henry Anderson's niece. She will be staying with us." Martha's expression softened immediately. "Henry's niece. Lord, I remember Henry. Good man. Come inside, child. You look half dead from that journey." The house was cool and clean, furnished simply but comfortably. Martha showed Willow to a small room at the back of the house with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the western pastures. "You rest up," Martha said. "We will talk about work in the morning. For now, you just get yourself settled." Willow wanted to protest that she could start working immediately, that she did not want to be a burden, but exhaustion suddenly crashed over her like a wave. She managed a quiet thank you before Martha left, closing the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the letter again, reading her uncle's words for what must have been the 100th time. "Thomas, if you are reading this, I am gone and my niece Willow is alone in the world. She is a good girl, honest and hardworking, but she has no family left and no prospects. I am calling in that debt you swore you owed me all those years ago. Please give her a place to stay and honest work. Teach her what she needs to know to survive out there. I trust you like I would trust my own son. Your friend, Henry Anderson." Willow folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. Her uncle had never mentioned saving anyone's life, had never spoken of Colorado or cowboys or ranches. He had been a quiet man who worked in a warehouse and lived modestly. But he had known, somehow, that Thomas Xavier would honor his word. She lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, and was asleep within minutes. When she woke, evening light was slanting through the window and the smell of cooking food drifted through the house. Willow splashed water on her face from the basin, tried to tidy her hair, and ventured out into the main room. Thomas was sitting at a large wooden table, going over what looked like account books. He glanced up when she entered and stood immediately. "Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you." "I apologize for falling asleep like that." "Nothing to apologize for. You traveled a long way." Martha brought plates of food to the table, beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread that was still warm. Willow's stomach growled audibly, and Thomas grinned. "Sit down and eat before you faint," he said. They ate together, and Willow learned that Martha had been the housekeeper at the XXX for 5 years, ever since Thomas had built the place up enough to need one. There were also 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, good men who worked hard and kept to themselves. "What kind of work did you do back in St. Louis?" Thomas asked. "I worked in a boarding house," Willow said. "Cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever was needed. Before that, I helped my uncle with his accounts. I can read and write and do figures." Thomas exchanged a glance with Martha. "We could use help with the books," he said. "I can manage cattle and horses, but paperwork makes my head ache." And Martha could always use an extra pair of hands around the house. "I will do whatever you need," Willow said earnestly. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Thomas said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. His blue eyes were steady on hers. "Your uncle did me a good turn when I needed it most. I am glad to return the favor." Over the following days, Willow settled into life at the XXX Ranch. She woke early each morning to help Martha with breakfast for the men, then spent her mornings working on the ranch accounts. The ledgers had been neglected for months, and it took her several days to sort through all the receipts and invoices and get everything properly recorded. Thomas would come in from working with the horses around midday, dusty and tired, and find her bent over the books at his desk. He always paused in the doorway to watch her for a moment before announcing his presence, though Willow pretended not to notice. In the afternoons, she helped Martha with the endless domestic work that kept a ranch running, mending clothes and putting up preserves and tending the vegetable garden behind the house. She learned that Martha was a widow whose husband had died in the war, that she had no children of her own, and that she considered Thomas something like a son. "He was just a boy when he came out here," Martha told her one afternoon as they snapped beans together on the porch. 18 years old and stubborn as a mule. He worked for old man Daniels for 3 years, saved every penny and bought this land with money he had earned himself. Built it all from nothing. "He seems very capable," Willow said carefully. Martha gave her a knowing look. "He is a good man. Honest, hardworking, treats people fairly. But he is lonely, even if he would not admit it." Willow felt heat rise in her cheeks and focused intently on the beans in her lap. On Sunday, Thomas asked if she would like to see more of the ranch. Willow accepted eagerly, glad for a chance to escape the confines of the house. He saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for her, and they rode out across the grasslands together. "How much land do you have?" Willow asked as they moved at an easy pace. 500 acres, Thomas said. "It is not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it is mine, free and clear. We run about 200 head of cattle, and I am building up a string of horses. Good horses are always in demand. It must have taken years to build all this." 8 years, he said. "Since I was 18. There were times I was not sure I would make it, but I am stubborn." She smiled. Martha said the same thing. They rode to the top of a low rise, and Thomas pointed out the boundaries of his land, the water sources, the best pastures. He talked about his plans to expand the horse operation, to build a better bunkhouse, to maybe buy the adjoining property if it ever came up for sale. Willow listened and watched him as he spoke. There was a passion in his voice when he talked about the ranch, a pride that was well earned. She found herself thinking that Henry had been right to send her here, that Thomas Xavier was exactly the kind of man who would honor a debt to a friend. But there was something else too, something she had not expected. She found herself noticing the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands as he controlled his horse, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She was drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. On the ride back, Thomas asked about her life in St. Louis, and Willow told him about the boarding house, about her uncle's quiet life, about the loneliness of having no real family. "Uncle Henry was kind to me," she said, "but he was not an affectionate man. I think losing my aunt, his wife, hardened something in him. He provided for me after my parents died, gave me a roof over my head and made sure I could read and write, but it was not a warm household." "That must have been hard," Thomas said. "I did not know any different," Willow admitted. "But coming here, seeing how you and Martha are together, it is different. It feels more like a family." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, and when he looked at her, Willow felt her breath catch. "I am glad you feel that way," he said quietly. Summer faded into early autumn, and Willow had been at the Triple X for nearly 2 months. She had taken over all the bookkeeping and much of the household management, freeing Martha to focus on the cooking and the extensive food preservation needed to get through the Colorado winter. The ranch hands had accepted her presence without comment, tipping their hats when they saw her and complimenting her biscuits at breakfast. But it was Thomas who occupied most of her thoughts. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, working together on the accounts in the evening after supper, discussing the ranch operations and planning for the future. He valued her opinion, she realized, listened when she suggested more efficient ways to organize the records or pointed out expenses that seemed unusually high. One evening in late September, they were going over the supply orders when Willow noticed a discrepancy in the feed invoices. "Thomas, did you order 3 tons of grain last month?" He looked up from the leather he was oiling. "No, just 2 tons. Why?" "Because there is an invoice here for 3 and it has been paid." His expression darkened. "Let me see that." They spent the next hour going through all the recent invoices and found 2 more discrepancies. Someone had been adding extra charges to legitimate orders and pocketing the difference. "It is not much," Thomas said, his jaw tight with anger. $20 here, 15 there. "But it is the principle of the thing. The invoices all came from Hendrick's Supply in town," Willow said. "Could it be someone there?" "Or one of the ranch hands picking up the orders," Thomas said grimly. "I hate to think it, but it is possible." He rode into Julesburg the next morning to speak with Mr. Hendricks, and returned that afternoon with news. The supply store owner had been mortified to discover that his new clerk had been running the scheme on several ranches in the area, not just the Triple X. The young man had been fired immediately and the money would be refunded. "You saved us from losing a lot more," Thomas said to Willow that evening. "If you had not caught it, he could have kept going for months." "I am just glad I could help," she said. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You have been a help in more ways than you know, Willow. This place runs smoother than it ever has. But more than that, you make it feel like a home." Willow's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Thomas, I know this is not what you expected when you came here," he said, his blue eyes searching hers. "I know you came because you had nowhere else to go, but I hope that is not the only reason you are staying." "It is not," she whispered. "It has not been for a while now." He stood and came around the table, drawing her to her feet. They stood close together, and Willow could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I care about you, Willow," he said softly. "More than I probably should, given that you have only been here a few months, but I cannot help it. You have become important to me." "You are important to me too," she said, looking up at him. "I think I started falling for you that first day, when you read the letter and did not hesitate to help me." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his palms. "I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right." "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and sure. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, sweet and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I want to court you properly," Thomas said. "I want to do this right." "I would like that," Willow said, smiling up at him. Martha was delighted when they told her the next morning. "About time," she said briskly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "I have been watching you 2 dance around each other for weeks." Over the following months, Thomas courted Willow with a sincerity that touched her heart. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, taught her to ride better so they could explore the ranch together, and talked with her for hours about everything and nothing. He was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but the heat in his eyes when he looked at her left no doubt about his feelings. Willow had never been happier. The ranch had become her home, the work fulfilling in ways her old life had never been. She had a family in Thomas and Martha, a purpose, and the growing certainty that she had found where she belonged. Winter came to Colorado with bitter cold and heavy snows. The ranch work became harder, focused on keeping the cattle and horses fed and the buildings maintained. Willow spent more time indoors, but even the long, dark evenings were pleasant when spent beside the fire with Thomas, reading aloud or simply talking while the wind howled outside. On Christmas Eve, Thomas gave her a beautiful shawl he had ordered specially from Denver, soft wool in a deep blue that matched his eyes. Willow gave him a new ledger she had made herself, binding the pages carefully and tooling his initials into the leather cover. "It is beautiful," he said, running his fingers over the leather. "You did this yourself," Martha taught me, she said. "I wanted to make you something with my own hands." Thomas set the ledger aside and pulled her close. They were alone in the main room, Martha having retired early to give them privacy. "Willow, I love you," he said, the words simple and true. "I have loved you for months now, but I wanted to wait until I was sure you felt the same way." "I do," she said, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "I love you, Thomas. I think I have since that first day on the road." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, until they were both trembling. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire but also with restraint. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not been courting long by some standards, but I am sure. I want you as my wife, my partner in all of this. Will you marry me, Willow?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in early February 1875, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Julesburg. Martha stood up with Willow, and one of the ranch hands served as Thomas's best man. The preacher was an elderly man who had seen countless couples married over his long career, and he pronounced them husband and wife with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride," he said. Thomas did, sweetly and chastely given their audience, but with a promise in his eyes that made Willow blush. They returned to the ranch for a wedding dinner that Martha had prepared, a feast of roasted beef and vegetables and pies. The ranch hands offered their congratulations and then tactfully disappeared to the bunkhouse, giving the newlyweds their privacy. That night, in the room that was now theirs together, Thomas made love to his wife with a tenderness that brought tears to Willow's eyes. He was patient and gentle, careful of her inexperience, and when they finally came together completely, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "My beautiful wife." "I love you too," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "My wonderful husband." Life as Mrs. Thomas Xavier was everything Willow could have hoped for and more. She ran the household and kept the books while Thomas managed the ranch operations, and they made a formidable team. The ranch continued to prosper, the horse operation growing until Thomas's animals were sought after throughout Colorado. Spring brought new life to the ranch, with calves and foals born in quick succession. Willow loved watching Thomas with the young animals, seeing the patience and care he took with them. He would make a wonderful father, she thought, and the idea made her smile. In late May, Willow realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She said nothing at first, not wanting to get Thomas's hopes up, but when June came and went with no change, she could no longer deny the truth. She was carrying his child. Martha guessed before Willow worked up the courage to tell Thomas. The older woman found her bent over the wash basin one morning, sick as a dog, and put a knowing hand on her back. "How far along?" Martha asked gently. 3 months, I think," Willow said weakly. "You need to tell him, child." "He will be over the moon." That evening, after supper, Willow took Thomas's hand and led him outside to sit on the porch steps. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and the air was sweet with the scent of prairie grass. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart pounding. Thomas looked at her with concern. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said quickly. "Better than fine. Thomas, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, as if the words had not quite registered. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. "A baby!" He pulled her into his arms, careful not to hold her too tightly. "Willow, this is the best news." "When?" "Late November or early December, I think." "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. He pressed a hand gently to her still flat stomach. "There is a baby in there." "There is," she said, laughing at his expression. Thomas became impossibly attentive after that, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a book. Willow protested that she was pregnant, not an invalid, but secretly she loved his fussing. He talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. Summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Willow's belly grew round, and she felt the first flutters of movement in July, quickening to strong kicks by August. Thomas was fascinated by every aspect of her pregnancy, his hand always finding her stomach, feeling for the baby's movements. "He is strong," Thomas said one evening, his palm pressed against a particularly vigorous kick. "Or she," Willow reminded him. "Or she," he agreed, kissing her softly. "I do not care which, as long as you are both healthy." As autumn arrived and Willow's time drew near, Thomas became increasingly worried. The nearest doctor was in Julesburg, 5 miles away, and the roads could become impassable quickly if it snowed. He wanted to take her to town to stay with the doctor's family until the baby came, but Willow refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "I am having this baby here. Martha has delivered babies before, and we will be fine." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. "At least let me send for the doctor when your time comes." "Yes, you can send for the doctor," she agreed, though she suspected the baby would come long before the doctor could arrive. Her labor started on a cold night in late November, 3 weeks before they had expected. Willow woke to a cramping pain in her lower back and knew immediately what was happening. She touched Thomas's shoulder in the darkness. "Thomas, wake up. The baby is coming." He was on his feet in an instant, eyes wide. "Now, are you sure?" "Yes, I am sure," she said, breathing through another contraction. "Go get Martha and send one of the men for the doctor." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Martha took charge with calm efficiency, and Willow clung to Thomas's hand as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. She had never experienced pain like this, wave after wave that seemed to tear through her body. "You are doing so well," Thomas kept saying, his voice rough with emotion. "So strong, my love." Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came, sliding into Martha's waiting hands with a lusty cry. Willow collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and euphoric. "It is a boy," Martha announced, wrapping the baby in a clean cloth. "A healthy boy with good lungs." She placed the baby in Willow's arms, and Willow looked down at her son through tears of joy. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "A boy," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around his father's calloused thumb. "Our son." "What should we name him?" Willow asked. Thomas looked at her, then back at their son. "What do you think of Henry?" "After your uncle," fresh tears spilled down Willow's cheeks. "Henry Xavier. It is perfect." The doctor arrived an hour later to find mother and baby both doing well. He examined them thoroughly, pronounced himself satisfied, and accepted a cup of Martha's strong coffee before riding back to town. Little Henry thrived from the start, a healthy baby with a powerful appetite and his father's determined nature. Thomas was completely smitten, spending every spare moment with his son. Willow would find them together at all hours, Thomas holding the baby and talking to him about horses and cattle, and all the things they would do together when Henry was older. That first winter with the baby was exhausting but wonderful. Willow had never felt so complete, so utterly content with her life. She had a husband who loved her, a beautiful son, and a home that was truly hers. Sometimes she thought about that scared, lonely girl who had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a letter, and she could hardly believe how much her life had changed. Spring came again, and Henry grew from an infant to a chubby, smiling baby who delighted in everything around him. Thomas would take him out to the corrals, pointing out the horses and teaching him animal sounds that the baby tried enthusiastically to imitate. On a warm evening in May, when Henry was 6 months old, Willow and Thomas sat on the porch together while their son napped inside. Thomas had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into his warmth, perfectly content. "You ever think about that day we met?" Thomas asked. "You walking down that dusty road with your carpetbag." "All the time," Willow said. "I was so scared. I had no idea what I was walking into." "I remember seeing you and thinking you looked lost," he said. "And then you showed me that letter, and I knew Henry Anderson had sent you to me for a reason." "That is all the proof I need," Willow quoted. "Those were the first words that made me feel like maybe everything would be all right." Thomas tilted her face up to his. "I meant them. Your uncle's word was good enough for me, but I never imagined, never dreamed that you would become so much more than someone I was helping. You became my whole world, Willow. You became mine too," she said softly. "You and Henry, this ranch, this life. It is more than I ever hoped for." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the house, Henry stirred and made a small sound, and Willow started to rise, but Thomas stopped her. "I will get him," he said. "You rest." He returned a moment later with their son, who was wide awake and grinning. Thomas sat back down beside Willow, settling Henry on his lap. The baby grabbed for his father's finger and cooed happily. "I have been thinking," Thomas said. "The ranch is doing well, better than I ever expected. I want to expand the house, add more rooms, maybe build a separate office for the bookkeeping so we do not have papers all over the dining table." "That sounds wonderful," Willow said. "And I was thinking," he continued, a smile playing at his lips, "we might need those extra rooms sooner rather than later." Willow felt her cheeks warm. They had resumed their marital relations a few months after Henry's birth, and she knew it was certainly possible. "Thomas Xavier, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I would love to have more children with you," he said. "If you want that too. I love being a father and I love seeing you as a mother. I think Henry would love a brother or sister." "I would like that," Willow said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I always wanted a big family after growing up so alone." "Then we will have one," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. True to his word, Thomas began expanding the house that summer. He hired carpenters from Julesburg, and the sound of sawing and hammering became a constant background noise. The additions included 2 new bedrooms, a proper office, and a larger kitchen that made Martha practically weep with joy. In September, Willow confirmed that she was pregnant again. This time the news was expected, but no less wonderful. Thomas was just as excited as he had been the first time, and even little Henry seemed to sense that something special was happening, patting his mother's growing belly with chubby hands. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Willow knew what to expect. She continued her work keeping the ranch accounts and managing the household, though Thomas and Martha both insisted she take frequent rests. Henry was walking now, toddling around the house and getting into everything with the determined curiosity of a 1-year-old. The baby came in late May of 1877, another boy they named William after Willow's father. William was quieter than Henry had been, a peaceful baby who nursed contentedly and slept through the night within a few weeks. Henry was fascinated by his little brother, always wanting to help and touch and see what the baby was doing. "We are blessed," Thomas said one evening, watching his son sleep in the cradle he had made for Henry and now shared with William. "Two healthy boys, a thriving ranch, and you. I could not ask for more." "I could not either," Willow said, wrapped in his arms. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life." The years that followed were full and happy. The Triple X continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the region. Thomas's horses were highly prized, and he was able to command top prices for them. The cattle operation remained steady, providing reliable income year after year. Henry and William grew into active, healthy boys who loved the ranch and the animals. By the time Henry was 5, he was already following his father around, wanting to help with every task. William, at 3, was more thoughtful and careful, preferring to watch and learn before trying things himself. In the spring of 1879, Willow discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time. She was 31 now, Thomas was 33, and they both agreed this would likely be their last child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in January of 1880, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor, after Thomas's mother who had died when he was young. Eleanor was a beautiful baby with her mother's dark hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. Her brothers adored her, and Thomas was completely wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "I never knew I could love someone so much," Thomas said, holding his daughter while she slept peacefully against his chest. "She is perfect." "She has you completely fooled already," Willow teased. "And she always will," he agreed without shame. Martha, now in her 60s, announced her intention to retire from most of her duties. "I am getting too old for all this work," she said, "but I am not going anywhere. This is my home too." They converted one of the new rooms into a comfortable suite for Martha, and hired a young woman from town to help with the cooking and cleaning. Martha spent her days doting on the children and offering advice that Willow had learned to always consider carefully. The 1880s brought new challenges and new growth. A particularly harsh winter in 1881 tested them all, but the ranch survived with minimal losses thanks to Thomas's careful planning and preparation. Henry, now 7, showed a remarkable aptitude for working with the horses, able to calm even the most skittish animals with patience and gentle words. William, at 5, demonstrated a head for numbers that reminded Thomas of Willow. He loved helping his mother with the account books, carefully practicing his figures and asking endless questions about how the ranch operated. And Eleanor, just a toddler, was the heart of the household, bringing laughter and joy to even the hardest days. In the summer of 1883, Thomas surprised Willow by taking her to Denver for a week, leaving the children in Martha's capable care. It was their first time away from the ranch together since their wedding, and Willow felt both excited and guilty about leaving the children. "They will be fine," Thomas assured her as they boarded the train. "Martha has raised more children than we can count, and the boys are old enough to help with Eleanor. We deserve some time together, just the two of us." Denver was a revelation, a bustling city that had grown enormously in the years since Colorado had become a state. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, and attended a theater performance. Thomas bought Willow a beautiful dress from a fancy shop, and she bought him a new watch to replace his battered old one. But the best part was simply being together without the constant demands of the ranch and children. They talked for hours, made love without worrying about being interrupted, and remembered what it had been like when they were courting, before life became so full and complicated. "I needed this," Willow admitted on their last evening in Denver. "I love our life, love our children more than anything, but it is good to remember that we are still us, still the two people who fell in love. We will always be us," Thomas said, pulling her close. "The ranch and the children, all of it matters. But you are the foundation everything else is built on. I loved you first, and I will love you always." They returned home to chaos, as Alina had apparently decided to climb everything in sight while they were gone, and Henry had been thrown from a horse, though he insisted he was fine. William had kept meticulous notes of everything that had happened, presenting them to his mother with obvious pride. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms, and the years continued to pass. The children grew and changed, becoming more themselves with each passing season. Henry was clearly going to be a rancher like his father, already talking about running the XXX someday. William spoke of becoming a lawyer or a banker, someone who worked with numbers and contracts. And Alina announced she was going to be a doctor, a declaration that made Thomas laugh and Willow feel fiercely proud. In 1887, Thomas decided it was time to buy the adjacent property, which had come up for sale after the owner died with no heirs. It would nearly double the size of the XXX, and with Henry now 13 and increasingly capable of real work, Thomas felt they could manage the expansion. The purchase was finalized in the fall, and the XXX officially became one of the largest ranches in that part of Colorado. They celebrated with a big dinner, inviting neighboring ranchers and friends from town. It was a joyous occasion, marking how far they had come from that day 13 years ago when Willow had arrived with nothing but a letter. During the party, Willow found a quiet moment to step outside. She stood on the porch, looking out over the land that had become her home, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. Uncle Henry had been gone for 13 years now, but she still thought of him often, still felt grateful that in his final act he had given her everything. "There you are," Thomas said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I was wondering where you had disappeared to." "Just thinking," she said, leaning back against him, "about Uncle Henry and that letter and how different my life could have been." "I think about that sometimes too," Thomas said. "What would have happened if you had not come here? If I had been away that day and missed you on the road? If I had been less trusting?" "But you were not," Willow said, turning in his arms to face him. "You read his letter and you said that was all the proof you needed. You trusted him and you helped me, and because of that, we found each other." "Best decision I ever made," Thomas said, kissing her softly. They heard laughter from inside, their children's voices rising above the general noise of the party. Alina shrieked about something, and William's patient voice tried to explain whatever had excited her. Henry's deeper tones, changing now as he approached manhood, cut through it all. "We made all of this," Willow said wonderingly. "A whole family, a whole life." "We did," Thomas agreed, "and we are not done yet. The years that followed brought the changes that time always brings. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1889, mourned by the entire family. She had lived to see Henry reach 15, tall and strong and already a skilled horseman. She had seen William excel in school and talk seriously about attending university. She had seen Alina grow into a bright, curious 10-year-old who asked endless questions about everything. They buried Martha on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree she had always loved. Willow planted wildflowers on the grave come spring, and they bloomed there every year after. Henry decided against university, choosing instead to work the ranch full-time. At 16, he was already as capable as most grown men, and Thomas relied on him more and more. They worked together like partners, expanding the horse operation and improving the breeding lines. William did go to university in Denver, studying law as he had always planned. He came home during summers and holidays, bringing books and new ideas. He talked about staying in Denver after graduation, opening his own practice, but Willow could see he was torn. He loved the city, but he also loved the ranch. Eleanor, at 13, was as determined as ever to become a doctor. She read every medical book she could get her hands on, and had appointed herself the ranch's official nurse, treating every minor injury with serious concentration. In the spring of 1892, when Willow was 44 and Thomas was 46, they received word that the adjoining property to the south was available. The owner wanted to sell and retire to California, and he offered Thomas first right of refusal. It would make the XXX one of the biggest ranches in the state, Thomas said, looking at the map spread across his desk. But it is a lot of money and a lot of work. Henry is ready for more responsibility, Willow pointed out. And William might come home if there was a bigger operation to manage. We could afford it. Thomas looked at her, a smile playing at his lips. After all these years, you still surprise me. I thought you might say it was too much. I learned from the best, she said. You taught me to think big and work hard. Besides, I have seen the accounts. We can do this. They bought the property, and the XXX grew to encompass nearly 2,000 acres. William, hearing the news, made a decision that surprised no one who really knew him. He would finish his law degree, but then he was coming home. The ranch needed someone who understood contracts and negotiations, and he wanted to be part of the family operation. Henry was delighted to have his brother coming home. For all their differences, the brothers were close, and the idea of running the ranch together appealed to both of them. They began making plans, talking about the future and how they would manage things when Thomas eventually retired. I am not retiring any time soon, Thomas protested when he overheard one of these conversations. We know, Father, Henry said with a grin, but it is good to plan ahead. Eleanor, at 15, was still determined to become a doctor, but she had also fallen in love with teaching. She spent her free time helping younger children in Julesburg learn to read, discovering she had a gift for explaining things clearly. Maybe I will be a doctor who also teaches, she said, or a teacher who knows medicine. Either way, I want to help people. On their 20th wedding anniversary in February 1895, Thomas took Willow back to the church where they had been married. They stood in the same spot where they had taken their vows 2 decades earlier, and Thomas took her hands in his. 20 years, he said. 20 years since I made you my wife. It has been the best 20 years of my life. Mine too, Willow said, tears in her eyes. I love you just as much now as I did then, more even. I want to renew our vows, Thomas said. Here now, just the two of us. I want to promise you again that I will love you and cherish you for the rest of my life. The old preacher who had married them had long since passed, but the current minister was happy to oblige. They renewed their vows there in the empty church, promising again to love and honor each other through whatever years remained. That evening they had a family dinner to celebrate. Henry was 21 now, a man grown, capable and confident. William, 19, had just graduated from university and would be moving home permanently in the spring. Eleanor, at 15, was on the cusp of young womanhood, beautiful and brilliant and full of dreams. "I want to make a toast," Henry said, standing with his glass raised. "To Mother and Father, who built all of this from nothing, who taught us what love and hard work and integrity look like, who gave us the best possible example of what a marriage should be. We are who we are because of you." Willow found she could not speak around the lump in her throat. Thomas squeezed her hand under the table, his eyes suspiciously bright. "To family," William added, "to the Triple X and everyone who has made it what it is." "To home," Eleanor said simply. They drank together, and Willow looked around the table at her family, at the life she and Thomas had built together. It had all started with a letter and a leap of faith, with a cowboy who said those words were all the proof he needed. That leap of faith had given her everything. The following years brought more changes as the children grew into adults and began making their own paths. Henry, at 23, married a young woman from a neighboring ranch, a practical, capable girl named Sarah who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They had their first child, a boy, in 1898, making Thomas and Willow grandparents for the first time. William hung out his shingle in Julesburg, practicing law while still helping manage the ranch's business affairs. He courted the schoolteacher, a quiet woman named Margaret who shared his love of books and learning. Eleanor, defying convention, went to Denver to study at one of the few medical programs that would accept women. It was hard and often thankless, but she persevered with the same determination she had shown since childhood. She came home during holidays, full of stories about her studies and the patients she was learning to treat. Thomas and Willow, now in their 50s, gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Henry had taken over most of the management, with William handling the legal and financial matters. The Triple X was in good hands, and Thomas and Willow finally had time to simply enjoy life together. They took long rides across the ranch lands, just the two of them, as they had in the early days of their courtship. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set and talking about nothing and everything. They played with their grandchildren and made plans for the future. "We did well," Thomas said one evening as they sat together, his arm around her shoulders. "Our children are happy and successful. The ranch is secure. We built something that will last." "We did," Willow agreed, "but the best thing we built was us. Everything else came from that." On a warm June evening in 1901, the entire family gathered at the Triple X to celebrate Thomas's 55th birthday. Henry and Sarah were there with their 3 children. William and Margaret brought their infant daughter, and Eleanor came home from Denver, where she was now practicing medicine. They ate and laughed and told stories long into the night. Thomas looked around at his family, at the grandchildren playing, at his grown children so confident and capable, at his wife still beautiful after 26 years of marriage, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Thomas and Willow walked out to the hill where Martha was buried. The moon was full, casting silver light across the grasslands. "Do you ever think about that letter?" Thomas asked. "Wonder what made Henry write it? Why he waited until the very end to tell you about me?" "All the time," Willow said. "I think maybe he wanted to be sure I could take care of myself, that I was not just running to someone else to solve my problems. He gave me time to grow up and learn to be independent. And then, when I had nowhere else to turn, he gave me a chance." "He gave us both a chance," Thomas said. "I might never have married if you had not come along. I was too focused on building the ranch, too set in my ways. You changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Willow said, leaning into his warmth. "I was so lost and alone. And then there you were, this cowboy on a horse, reading a letter from a man you had not seen in years. And you did not hesitate. You just said those words. "That is all the proof I need," Thomas quoted. "I meant them. I still do. Your uncle's word was good enough for me then, and everything that came after has only confirmed that he knew exactly what he was doing when he sent you to me." They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, two people who had built a life together from nothing but faith and love and hard work. The ranch spread out around them, peaceful in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. An owl called from the cottonwood tree. Willow thought about that scared young woman stepping off the stagecoach 27 years ago, clutching a letter and hoping for a miracle. She had found so much more than she had ever dared to hope for. She had found home and family and purpose. She had found love that deepened and grew stronger with every passing year. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked softly. "About how grateful I am," she said. "For Uncle Henry, for that letter, for you, for all of this. I know life does not always work out the way we hope, but somehow ours did. We got our happy ending." "It is not an ending," Thomas said, turning her to face him. "It is still our story, still being written. We have more years ahead of us, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together." "You are right," Willow said, smiling up at him. "Our story is not over yet." "Not by a long shot," he agreed and kissed her beneath the Colorado moon, and indeed their story continued for many more years. They saw more grandchildren born, watched Alina become one of the most respected doctors in Colorado, saw Henry expand the ranch even further, and saw William become a judge known for his fairness and integrity. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They sat together on the porch every evening without fail, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had built together. When Thomas finally passed away in the winter of 1920 at the age of 74, it was peacefully in his sleep, Willow beside him as she had been for 45 years. She mourned him deeply, but found comfort in knowing how full and happy their life together had been. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love she and Thomas had shared. The Triple X Ranch continued to thrive under Henry's management and eventually passed to his sons. But in the main house, in a place of honor, they kept a framed letter, yellowed with age, written in a careful hand. Next to it hung a photograph of Thomas and Willow on their 20th wedding anniversary, standing together in front of the church, their love evident in every line of their faces. New generations would ask about the letter and the photograph, and someone would always tell the story. About a young woman who arrived in Colorado with nothing but a letter and a prayer. About a cowboy who read that letter and said, "That is all the proof I need." About how from that simple beginning, a great love story had unfolded, one that created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with the reminder that sometimes the greatest leaps of faith lead to the greatest rewards, and that true love, once found, can build anything.